Hilchos Terumos Perek Asiri, the laws of the Truma separation, chapter 10. The Truma separation, which we've been learning about for the last 10 days, of course, is the 2% of produce that every farmer needs to give to the Kohen. Fundamentally speaking, we saw in chapter 6, the only person who is meant to consume the Truma food is a Kohen. His wife is allowed 2 members of his family, his slaves, his animals, but fundamentally it's a Kohen. Anybody who's a non-Kohen is prohibited from eating Truma, as we also saw in chapter 6. The halachic name for somebody who's a non-Kohen is a Zar. Zar in Hebrew means a stranger, but in the Torah it specifically refers to people that are non-Kohanim. The question is, what happens if a non-Kohen eats Truma? So again, we learned this generally speaking a couple of days ago, that if you do it purposely, the punishment is death by the hands of heaven plus lashes in the court down here. And if you do so inadvertently, then you have to make restoration, financial restitution for that which you ate, plus you need to add a fifth. And a fifth in the Torah, as we see here on the screen, and we're going to get into it in detail in today's chapter, is really a quarter of the principal. In other words, if you ate 4 quarters worth, your restitution will be an additional quarter, such that a quarter is going to be a fifth of the entire total, but it's really a quarter of the principal. That's what we're going to be occupied with today. The laws of somebody who eats Truma unknowingly, inadvertently, and all the specifics of this restitution of Chomesh that's involved when it comes to eating Truma. So let's get right into it. It says that Rambam Malacha Aleph. Zar sha'achal Truma bishgaga. If a non-Kohen ate Truma inadvertently, Meshalim keren v'chomesh, so the basic law is you need to pay back the principal plus a fifth. What does it mean unknowingly though? So presumably we say unknowingly means you don't know that the food is Truma. Had you known that the food is Truma, you wouldn't have touched it. Says the Rambam, it goes one step further. Afal pisha yedeya shehi Truma. Even if it's a circumstance where the person who's eating the Truma knows that what he's eating is Truma, vishehu muzar aleh. He may even know that there's a prohibition against eating Truma. Aval lo yadayim chayav aleh misayim lav. His lack of knowledge was only in the punishment arena. He didn't know if you're liable to the death penalty for it or not. Harizu shgaga. Relative to the laws of Truma, it's considered an inadvertence. He's considered to have eaten the Truma not purposely but unknowingly. Or Meshalem keren v'chomesh, and he does not incur the more severe penalty. He only has to make restitution of the principal and a fifth. Halacha Beis, what constitutes eating? What's considered eating Truma? Echad ha'oichel davar shedarkei lechal. The prohibition encompasses whether a person eats something which is normally eaten, ve'echad ha'sheisa davar shedarkei lishtos, whether a person drinks something normally drunk, ve'echad ha'sach davar shedarkei lasuch, and whether one smears something which is normally smeared. We're going to see in tomorrow's chapter, chapter 11, that typically Truma is consumed in these 3 ways: eating, drinking, smearing. Any of these are called consumption. And if you do any of these 3, and you're not a Kohen, you have to make restitution. Shanemar, as it says, "V'lo yechalalu es kodshei b'nei Yisrael," the non-Kohanim should not desecrate the holy foods of Israel. This extra wording over here is l'rabos es hasach. It says don't desecrate. It doesn't say don't eat. Don't desecrate means even including smearing. The law also applies whether you eat ritually pure truma or ritually impure truma. As long as you did so unknowingly, mishalim keren v'chomesh, you make restitution by paying for the principal and the fifth. However, you're only obligated to pay the extra fifth if you consumed at least an olive-sized portion of the food. Shenemar, because it says, Ki yoichal kodesh bishgaga. The person gets the penalty of the fifth when he eats holy foods inadvertently. In halacha, there's no such thing as eating less than a kazayas. How much is a kazayas? I put a picture of it. There's a whole book called the Kazayas Hashalim. It explains how we measure the olive-sized portion, because it's obviously not an olive as we know it today. And today the modern commentaries try to convert it from volume into weight. The basic consensus is that it's about an ounce. But again, sometimes we do include volume, so we're not going to get into defining how big the olive-sized portion is, but this is how it is in all of halacha. The way we measure liability for punishment is if you eat a kazayas. Ukeshem sha'achilas truma b'kazayis, kach shasiya b'kazayis. Very interestingly, usually when it comes to halacha, food and drink have different minimum amounts. Comes to Yom Kippur, comes to different forbidden foods. Food is typically with a kazayis, olive-sized portion. Drink is usually a revius, a fluid measurement, a quarter of a log. But here, because the source in the Torah uses the word eating, and that also encompasses drinking, so we go with the same measurement. Kazayis for both. You have to eat, you have to drink an olive-sized portion to be liable to the fifth. That's how the Radvaz explains it, but he goes into at great length. Halacha Gimel, Ochal v'chazar v'ochal. Shasa v'chazar v'shasa. If a person ate and then ate some more, or he drank and then drank some more, Im yesh mitchilas achilu rishayna, ad soif achilu acharena, kadei achilas pras, if from the beginning of the first consumption till the end of the last consumption, enough time has elapsed to eat a half a loaf of bread, which there's a lot of opinions about this time frame, ranging from 2 to 9 minutes. Typically we follow the 4-minute rule. So let's just call it 4 minutes. If there's 4 minutes from the beginning of the first consumption to the end of the last, or if it's drinking, from the beginning of the first drink to the end of the last drink, enough time has elapsed to consume a revius, a quarter of a log. So anything you ate in that 4-minute time frame, anything that you drank in that revius time frame combines, and if in total during that time frame you consume the kazayas, you're liable. Halacha dalid, besides for the time, combining different materials can also combine. Let's say a person ate a bunch of different holy foods, that's non-Kohen, that he wasn't supposed to eat. Hatruma, you have the basic truma, which is the laws that we're dealing with now. Utrumas meiser, and we also have trumas meiser, which of course is the 10% that the Levite has to give from his 10%, which he gets from the people. But also that trumas meiser belongs to the Kohen. Bein shel demai, bein shel vadai, whether we're talking about trumas meiser that's separated from questionable produce or from definite produce. We had this concept a couple of days ago. Most Jews were presumed to separate their tithes properly. But there were certain Jews called Amei Haaretz, ignoramuses, who weren't so familiar with the laws of tithing, and many times they would get away with just giving truma. They wouldn't give meiser. They would give gifts to the Kohen, but not to the Levite. And so you had this produce which had a question on it. That's the word demai. Demai is a composite of 2 words. Damai. What is this? And so the rabbis ruled that whenever you buy produce from an Am Haaretz, you have to tithe it again on your own out of doubt. And the same way you have to tithe it, which is the 10% to the Levi, you have to also give Trumas Meiser, the 10% of that 10% to the Kohen, also out of doubt. So you can have Trumas Meiser, which could be either Demai or Vada. It can either be from questionable produce or from definite produce. The point is, both of these materials belong to the Kohen. The Hachala, then we have the first portion of the dough. Whenever you make a dough, if it's a certain size, you have to give the beginning portion to the Kohen. The Habikurim, and the first fruits of the 7 special fruits that Israel was blessed with, the first fruits have to be given to the Kohen. And we're going to have a whole set of laws on Bikurim and Chala where we'll delve into it. The Rambam is making a point over here that if a non-Kohen consumes a combined amount of all these things, takes a small bite of Truma, small bite of Trumas Meiser, small bite of Chala, small bite of Bikurim, if together there's an olive-sized portion of these Kohenic foods, Kulan Mitzdarfin Lekazayas, Lechayav Aleyan Misa V'chaimesh. They all combine to meeting that minimum requirement amount of the olive-sized portion to hold you liable if you did it purposely for the spiritual death penalty, or if you did it unknowingly to be required to pay a fifth. Shekulan nikru truma, because all of these things in the Torah are called truma. So while the main prohibition is really around truma itself, the 2% of produce, but anything else in the Torah which is also called truma also has that prohibition. And so if a non-Kohen will eat them, he'll be liable to these punishments. Now, biblically speaking, the law should dictate if you're dealing with questionable produce, which you're tithing only out of doubt, and taking trumas meiser 10% to the Kohen also out of doubt, that if you consume that, the law should say that you shouldn't be liable to a fifth. The same way you're not liable for a fifth if you consume the second tithe of questionable produce, as will be explained in the laws of the second tithe. After you give 10% to the Levi, you take another 10%, and the owner himself will take it to Jerusalem and have to eat it in a state of holiness. unless he wanted to transfer the holiness to cash. If you transfer the holiness to cash, you have to pay a fifth, an extra fifth when you redeem it. When it comes to questionable tithes, questionable produce, which are tithing only out of doubt, when you redeem the second tithe, you don't have to pay that extra fifth. So the same way, you don't have to pay the extra fifth for redeeming the second tithe, because it's questionable, so you shouldn't have to pay the fifth if the non-Kohen ate Trumas Meiser. Says the Rambam, Aval Amru Chachamim. The sages said, Im lo yischayev aleha chomesh yizalzelu ba. We're worried. If we're not going to obligate a non-Kohen who eats Trumas Meiser from questionable produce to pay the extra fifth, people will treat it cheaply. We want people to realize that even though it's out of a doubt, it has a very high holy status. And so, to the point that if a non-Kohen eats it, we're going to make him pay restitution for the principal and the fifth. Halacha hey, achal truma b'mezid v'hisrubai. If a non-Kohen ate truma knowingly, purposely, and he was warned against it, loike ve'enim mishalim. So as we said in chapter 6, you get lashes, you don't have to pay the fine, because we never get two penalties, either lashes or paying a fine, and here it's lashes. Lo yisrubai, if they did not warn him, so we can't call him eating truma unknowingly, because he did it knowingly, but he wasn't warned. So how does he compensate for what he did? Im haisa tahira, if the truma which he consumed was ritually pure, mishalim hakeren, ve'enem mishalim asachemish. So at least pay the principal, because you literally stole that from the Kohen. You got to pay that back. But no need to pay the fifth. So it's kind of funny in a way. Eating it unknowingly gets you treated stricter than eating it knowingly without being warned. Im haisa tameya, if it was impure truma. So again, if it was pure truma, you pay the money. If it was impure truma, mishalim demei eitzim. All you have to do is pay the worth of the produce you consumed had it been designated to be used for wood. Because indeed, ritually impure truma cannot be eaten by the Kohen. The only thing he can do with it is use it for fuel for his oven. So since the only use that the Kohen could have made of it is for fuel, so what did you steal from the Kohen? More fuel. So therefore, if you ate such ritually impure truma knowingly, the restitution you have to make is paying for it as though it were fuel. Therefore, if a non-Kohen would have eaten truma from berries or from pomegranates that became impure, he's actually exempt from payment altogether. You can't use berries or pomegranates for fuel. So, since it's ritually impure, the Kohen can't eat it. He can't either use it as fuel, so you haven't really stolen anything from him. So if you ate it knowingly with no warning, no need to pay. Halacha vav ha'oichel trumas chametz b'Pesach. A person eats truma, but it happens to be chametz, happens to be leavened food, and it's on Pesach, when it's forbidden anyway to eat this food. Nothing to do with truma, even regular food, you can't eat bread. Bein bezadin, bein mishgaga, bein tamea, bein tahira. So then, whether it was purposely or inadvertently, whether it was ritually pure or impure, pater minat tashlumin, the person is exempt from payment at all. For the same reason as in the last halacha, we don't impose two penalties. When a person eats chametz on Pesach, he has to deal with God on a different level. He gets spiritual excision. And since he's getting punished for that, we don't make him pay for the chametz that he ate on Pesach. In addition to the fact, as the Rambam will soon say in a moment, chametz on Pesach is forbidden to have any benefit from it. So it has no financial worth. As the Rambam continues, afilu hifrisha matzah v'hechmitza. Even if the truma was separated in a state of unleavened food, and later on it became chametz, potter, you're exempt, the non-Kohen is exempt for eating it. He doesn't even pay for it as though it could be used for fuel, because it cannot be used for fuel. Because it's forbidden for anybody to have benefit from chametz on Pesach, it has no financial worth. But what if a person inadvertently ate truma that was forbidden for a different reason? Not because it was chametz on Pesach, which is inherently forbidden. It was forbidden for a different reason. It was forbidden because it's Yom Kippur. When the prohibition is not on the food, it's on the person. It's forbidden for us to consume food. Food on Yom Kippur isn't inherently forbidden. It's the act of consumption, what's called the gavra, in yeshiva terminology. The person is forbidden, not the chefza, not the object. Oisha achal truma nekura, or a person consumed truma which was pecked at. In the Rambam's 10th book, he tells us that the sages forbade certain foods to be eaten because of worry that there was some physical danger attached to them. Maybe they were touched by different rodents or animals. One of them is when you have food that was just pecked at. You're worried maybe a snake bit into it, a sick bird bit into it. So the person wouldn't be able to consume this truma for a rabbinic reason. Or a person drinks truma wine that was left open overnight. Same thing. It's one of those things that the sages forbade out of danger. Or if a person smears on himself wine and oil together, which isn't a normal way of consuming things. You don't use wine and oil in a mixture. Or he drank oil and vinegar together. Or he chewed raw wheat. Or he swallowed vinegar. So in all of these cases, you do have to make restitution. Even though there was different kinds of prohibitions in these foods, but either they were rabbinic, or they weren't biblically inherent to the food, like Yom Kippur. And so they do have financial worth, and you do have to make restitution by paying for the principal on the fifth. Halacha ches haya saveya. A person was full. He ate a meal, v'katz b'mezayna. He was so full that now food is disgusting to him. V'hoysif al saveh ba'achilas truma. And then, having eaten all this food, he's literally about to throw up, he eats truma. So for him, essentially, when he ate the truma, it wasn't even eating, it was disgusting. He doesn't have to pay the fifth. Because it says you're only liable to a fifth if you eat truma. Not in a case where you're damaging yourself. Eating when you're so overfull is not eating. Same thing if you chew barley, you're exempt from the fifth because you're literally damaging yourself. Halacha tes zar shabala shezafin shel truma vehakion. This is an interesting scenario. I'm not sure if it would happen today, but take into account many times there was literally not a lot of food to go around, and people would eat things that we wouldn't consider eating so much today. Zar shabala shezafin shel truma. You have a non-Kohen who swallowed whole prunes of truma. Whole. He didn't chew them. Once he chewed them, the Radva says it becomes disgusting and becomes worthless. He swallowed whole prunes vehakion, and then he vomited them while they were whole. Uba acher ve'achlan gamhu. Comes a second guy and eats the prunes that the first person vomited. I guess he didn't know about it or for whatever reason. They're still whole. And he ate them bishgaga. He ate them also unknowingly. So you have the first guy swallowed the prunes unknowingly, threw them up. Second guy now eats them unknowingly. Harisha mishalem keren v'chaimesh. So the first person, he's considered to have eaten the prunes, even though he vomited them later. So he has to pay full principal and the fifth. The hasheni mishalim dmei eitzim larishain. And the second person is not considered to have eaten truma. The moment the first guy swallowed the prunes, he desecrated or he took away the holiness of the truma. Now, those prunes kind of belong to him. He's going to make restitution to the Kohen. He'll pay up for what he stole from the Kohen. He now owns the prunes. The second person who ate the prunes has to pay up restitution to the first guy, but only on the lower quality, only as if it were fuel. Halacha yud. Hamachil hapayalim ve'asa'irchim truma. If somebody feeds his workers or his guest truma, so they ended up eating truma unknowingly. So because they're like inadvertent people, they have to pay restitution. Doesn't matter that it was fed to them. Bottom line is, you ate truma unknowingly, you have to pay the principal and a fifth. Now, they have to get reimbursed. It wasn't their fault. And the employer or the host needs to reimburse them the worth of their meal. And not just the worth of their meal, the worth of their meal had it been prepared from regular produce, not from truma. Because the worth of regular chulin, regular food, is actually worth more than the truma which they ate. We're going to have this principle again in this chapter. Truma, because it can only be eaten by a Kohen, it has less market value. And he's supposed to give them ordinary produce. So he needs to reimburse them ordinary produce. Another element to why the truma is worth less in these people's eyes, or, as other commentaries explain it, another element to why the reimbursement has to be made, is because shadavar ha'asur nafshe shal adam chaysa mimenu. Forbidden foods, people are repelled by them. A Jew naturally is repelled by forbidden food. It won't cause him to become as full as ordinary produce would cause him to become. Even though over here, they ate it unknowingly. But that's the nature of a Jewish soul. The Rabbi once talked about this. The food that we eat has an effect on us whether or not we're aware of it. And retroactively, when it's revealed that what we ate was truma and it was forbidden, it doesn't have that same satiating effect as regular food does. And that's another reason why the host or the employer has to reimburse them at the price of regular produce, because that's the produce which they should have eaten and which would have made them really full. If a person feeds truma to his young children or to his slaves, adult or young, or if he eats truma that's from the diaspora, or you eat or drink less than the olive size portion. The nazir or if a nazir who was under a vow not to drink wine, he ate wine of truma, so he has double prohibition there. Or he drinks oil or smears wine. All these people pay only the principal and not the fifth, because there's no additional obligation unless you eat a kazayis or unless you smear it in the normal way or drink it in the normal way. It's not normal to drink oil or smear wine. And therefore you pay for what you stole. You stole the physical worth of the principle, but not the fifth. Halacha Yud Beis Bas Kohen She'es Nesua Yisrael. You have a daughter of a Kohen who was married to a regular Jew, in which case she loses the ability to eat truma. Aisha Nifsala, or she became disqualified for a different reason. The Achakach Achla Truma. And she nevertheless eats truma afterwards when she's not supposed to. She only has to pay for the principal, but she's not required to add a fifth. Why? Since at a certain point in her life she was able to eat truma, there's a leniency for the rest of her life. What about the opposite case? There was a regular Jew married to a Kohen, and she was eating truma like any wife of a Kohen does. The Amrullah, in the middle of the meal, they told her, Meis bailich oigershech, your husband died or he divorced you. So she has bigger problems than truma, but here we're talking about truma. Can she continue eating truma? Or there was a slave eating truma, thinking he was still owned by a Kohen, and someone told him, listen, Meis Rabcha, your master died, and the only heir that he left is a type of heir who won't allow you to eat truma. Let's say it was a Kohen whose kid was a chalal, a disqualified Kohen. Or he sold you off or gave you off to a regular Jew. Or he redeemed you and now you're just a regular Jew, you can't eat truma. Or a Kohen himself was eating truma. In the middle of his meal, he is informed that his genealogy is disqualified. He's a son of a woman who was divorcee or had chalitza done to her. So all these people only have to pay the principal. And if it was chametz they were eating and it was the eve of Pesach, they're exempt from paying. Because on Erev Pesach everyone's rushing to eat chametz, catch in the final chametz, so they didn't check in to see if they were still married or still owned or still a Kohen. So we can't blame them for that. Any of these cases, if there was truma still in their mouths when they found out that it's forbidden to them, rather than swallow it, spit it out. Even though it's going to damage the truma food. Rather spit it out than swallow it. If a person was eating truma, a Kohen, and they told them, listen, nitmesa, you just became impure. A rodent touched your foot. Or the truma just became impure. Or you were impure, or the truma was impure. Or he finds out that it's untithed. Or it's the first tithe which the trumas meiser wasn't taken from. Or it was unredeemed or improperly redeemed. Second tithe or consecrated food. Or he tasted a bug in his mouth. In all these cases he should spit it out. Again, rather than swallow it, spit it out. So you have two boxes. One contains truma apples, the other contains regular apples. Here are 4 apples, truma for sure, and they fell into one of the boxes. We don't know which one it fell into. The assumption is, we're going to treat it as if it fell into the box of truma. And if somebody would eat this one, he's considered to have eaten ordinary produce. There's no doubt that maybe there's truma in there. But if it's not only that, you don't even know which box is truma, same case, but you don't know the 2 boxes themselves. We're not sure if one is chul and one is truma. So then, if a non-Kohen eats one of the boxes, there's a pater min tashlumin. He's exempt from payment. Because when a person extracts payment from someone else, you have to bring the proof. The Kohen needs to prove that what he ate was ordinary produce. Now, the commentaries say, we're talking about a fifth. You have to pay for the principal, it's not the fifth. The hashniya neig bakit truma. And the second box you must treat as truma. and has to be given to the Kohen either way. If what you ate before was regular produce, this is Truma, has to be given to the Kohen. If what you ate before was Truma, well then you stole from the Kohen. You have to give the second box to the Kohen as payment for the Truma. If Mr. A eats the first box and Mr. B eats the second box, afhu patur, they're both exempt, because each one can say, hey, it was the other guy who ate the Truma, not me. If one person ate them both, you pay the worth, the fifth in this case, you're paying for sure for both. And if one person ate both boxes, and he pays the principal on the fifth based on the smaller of the two. Because again, when the Kohen wants to extract the money, he'll have to bring the proof that it was the bigger box. The guy can say, look, I for sure ate a box of Truma, but I'll pay you the smaller box. In Mezid Keren, if he did it purposely, just the principal, inadvertently, principal and a fifth. If a person was meant to pay a fifth, he ate Truma, he's meant to pay a fifth. Now, he eats the fifth. Before giving it to the Kohen, he consumes the fifth inadvertently. So obviously it's not money, obviously it's produce. He has to add a fifth to that fifth. Because the fifth is treated like the principal in all matters. And so too he must keep on adding fifth onto fifth if he keeps on consuming the fifth forevermore, till it reaches the amount less than a pruta. Because whenever you pay the principal and the fifth, the full payment is considered to be truma, even the extra fifth. With the exception that if they were replanted, whatever grows is considered regular grain. But the produce itself, the payment itself, is truma. If the Kohen wanted to pardon it, he cannot pardon it. When you only pay the principal, the payment that you make is considered regular grain. If the Kohen wants to pardon it, he can pardon it. A regular Jewess ate truma when she was not allowed to. Then she gets married to a Kohen. Who does she pay? If what she ate was truma that was put aside for a Kohen but never acquired by a Kohen, now that she's married to a Kohen, she can pay herself. Principal on the fifth. But if she had eaten truma that was already acquired by a Kohen, it was already in the Kohen's domain. So the principal she must pay to the owner, that Kohen. But the extra fifth she can pay herself. Because whenever you pay principal on the fifth, the idea is you can pay the principal to whoever owned the truma, but the fifth is your prerogative. You can pay whoever you want. Now that she's married to a Kohen, she can pay that extra fifth to the Kohen. If she didn't have a chance to pay till she got divorced, so she ate truma before she was married to a Kohen. Then she got married to a Kohen, then she got divorced. So at the time of eating and the payment, she's a non-Kohen. Either way, she cannot pay herself. It's as though she never was married to the Kohen ever, and so she pays like a regular Jewess. When you eat truma, whether it's inadvertently or purposely, and you weren't warned where you have to pay, you only pay the Kohen from completely tithed produce, which all the proper tithes were already taken from. But you can pay from gifts taken to the poor, fallen stocks, forgotten stocks, the corner of the field, ownerless property. You can also pay from the Levi tithes if the Trumas Meiser was taken from it. Even though there's a proportional 2% that still belongs to the Kohen, let's say the case we saw in chapter 3. If you take the Meiser while it's still stocks, if you gave the Meiser before the Truma, so the Levite can make restitution from that. You can pay from second tithe or consecrated property that was redeemed, even though it wasn't redeemed properly. Say it was given with an unminted coin, or it was redeemed without the fifth. You can make restitution from new grain over old grain, but not from one species to another. Because it says, you must give the Kohen the holy food, as you ate it. If somebody ate zucchini, type of cucumber, cucumis, you saw the Latin word for kishuin, that grew in the 6th year before the Shemitah year, he should wait for the produce of the 8th year to be produced and pay from them, not from the 7th year. It's forbidden to pay back a debt from Shvius, Shemitah produce, as will be explained in the end of this book in the laws of Shemitah. Halacha Chaf, Achal Truma Tmeya, when a person consumes ritually impure Truma, Meshalim Chulin Ben Tmein Ben Tahirin. He can pay back regular grain, whether it's ritually impure or pure. Achal Truma Tahira, Meshalim Chulin Tahirin. But if you ate ritually pure Truma, you can only pay back ritually pure Chulin. If you paid back ritually impure grain, whether purposely or inadvertently, tashlum of tashlumin, v'yachzer v'yishalim min atayrim, what you paid is paid, and you must pay again from pure grain. Chaf Aleph achal trumas chaver. If a person ate the truma that belongs to a kohen who is careful with the laws of ritual impurity, that's what the word chaver means. Mishalim lo, you pay it back to him. Achal trumas amaretz. If you ate the truma that belongs to a kohen who's not familiar with the laws of ritual purity, mishalim lechaver. Don't pay the guy back the produce. Pay the produce back to a chaver, to a kohen who keeps the laws of ritual purity. The noitel domeha mimenu, take the money from him. The noisin lama aretz achal trumas. In other words, have the kohen, so to speak, pay for that extra truma, then give it to the non-familiar, ritually impure kohen whose truma you ate. She'ein moisterin taris la'ama aretz. We don't give pure food, ritually pure food, to an ignoramus. We only give it to a chaver. Halacha chav beis gazal truma me'avi me'kayin va'achla. If a person stole truma, and gazal has the context of stolen publicly, in broad daylight. You stole truma from your grandfather who was a kohen and you ate it. It could be possible that you have a grandfather who was a kohen, had a daughter who had a son. Son is fully Jewish but not a kohen. So he stole truma from his grandfather and he ate it. Then his grandfather died, and he's one of the heirs. He cannot pay back himself. You must pay a different heir who's a kohen. Or if you didn't steal it, simply came to you as an inheritance. Your grandfather was a kohen, grandfather passed away, truma that he had in his possession falls to you, and he ate it. Or a creditor who collected truma as a debt. Or a woman collects truma as her ksuba payout, and they all ate it. They must pay the principal and a fifth to a kohen who's careful with the laws of ritual impurity. But because they actually owned the truma legitimately, they took it as a debt payment, or it came to them as an inheritance. Let that kohen reimburse them the money which they would have made had they sold the truma, which is a little less than regular value, because again, only a kohen can eat truma. A person stole truma as a ganav. Ganav means you stole discreetly. He didn't need it. The law of a ganav is that you have to pay back double, kefel. You pay the double owner, the double payment to the owner of the truma. But here you can pay back at the worth of truma, not the market value of ordinary produce. If you stole it and you ate it, you pay double the principal for the kefel, but only 1/5. Keren v'chemesh min achulin, 1 principal and a fifth from regular grain. The keren afilu midmei truma, and the other principal could be even from truma value money. Chav daled hoisa truma hekdesh lebed kabayis v'ganva v'achla. If the truma belongs to the temple treasury and a person steals it and eats it, einay mishalim tashlumei kefal, you don't pay double payment. She'ein tashlumei kefal behekdesh k'meshi yisbar din kaimai, as will be explained in the laws of stealing, we don't make double payments to the holy temple treasury. Avol mishalim keren ushnei chumshim. What you have to do is you have to pay 1 principal and 2/5. Chaymesh mishum eichel truma, the chaymesh mishum shenan min hekdesh. 1/5 for eating truma, 1/5 for having a benefit from temple possessions. Ulemi mishalim, who do you pay to in this case? Im haya ba kazayas ve'im bashav pruta. If there was a kazayas, an olive-sized portion, but it wasn't worth a pruta, which is the basic minimal amount of money worth, mishalim lakohanim, you pay the kohanim the money. But if it has a worth of a pruta, no matter what size it is, you have to pay the hektish, temple treasury. Chafhei, the Rambam asks a general question. How could we hold you liable both for restitution for the temple treasury and for truma? Why does the prohibition of hektish take effect over and above the prohibition of truma? In the laws of forbidden foods we saw that there's a rule that says, forbidden marriages we saw, there's a rule that says, ein isur halal isur. If you have a prohibition, another prohibition cannot take effect over it to hold you liable twice. Unless it's what's called an isur moisif, an isur which adds more to the prohibition. And that's the Rambam's answer. Because truma on its own is only forbidden to a non-kohen, but it's permitted to a kohen. Hikdisha, the moment it's consecrated, nesra ala kohen, it also has an additional prohibition on the kohen. And because there's an additional scope of the prohibition, lefichach neisaf ba'isur afal yisrael, so there's an additional prohibition also to a regular Jew, as we've explained in the laws of forbidden marriages and forbidden foods, and therefore the extra prohibition could take effect. If a person steals truma in broad daylight and he eats it, he only has to pay one principal, 1/5. Even though usually for stealing you have to pay also 1/5 sometimes. Here you use 1/5 and it exempts you from both truma and theft. Because it says same verse. You give the Kohen the holy foods. You're only liable to the 5th of the holy food, the truma. If you stole the food and you gave it to someone else to eat, the eater pays the principal and the 5th. And the Rambam concludes the chapter by defining what 5th means. Wherever we say you pay the principal and a 5th, that means if you ate worth 4, you have to pay worth 5 from what you ate, because that's a 5th of the sum total, a quarter of the principal. Wherever we say you pay 1 principal and 2/5, like in the last case, temple treasury, if you ate worth 4, so 2/5 would be 1 extra on each side, so a total of 6. Where we said you pay twice the principal and once the 5th, so if you ate 4, you pay twice the 4 plus 1/5, which is 9. A final rule. Whenever you make restitution, you only pay based on the market value at the time when you ate the truma. Whether it got cheaper since then or it got more expensive since then. The payment that you make is always made at the rate of the time when you consume the truma.